Good evening. I'm trying to sleep, but there is an electrical storm in my legs that seems to be judging me on the basis of the fact that any form of love that expressed towards myself doesn't meet its standards when it's using my body to judge me with it. So I have 3 benzodiazepine pills left and 1 sleeping pill. Not implicating anything, first and foremost, but I've been denied the routine meds that I get for arbitrary reasons and deemed to have drug-seeking behaviour when I've written it for, I've been denied lots of emergency requests for meds. So now I just lay here while what I've described before happens. Sleep deprivation and all that. You could conflate that with torture, but maybe it's self-inflicted. So, right, literally what I'm going to have to do to give myself some, I'm going to have to drink a small amount of alcohol. I don't want to. But, I'm literally, it's like a static electric storm. Don't worry, what goes on in the brain, it's far worse. It's far worse. Also, I'm made acutely aware that at any point I could have a horrible accident and it'd be even worse than it is now. But I also know it could be tons better, and this is pointless enduring this, so I've been studying today, but also before I was sorted out in digital form, something called, the idea of a self-organising criticality. Do you like that idea, or do you want to take me to a room and torture me for some idea about me in relation to you? I've also been looking at research into spatial temporal genome regulation in stress response and cell fate change, which is, an interesting and applicable related subject. Stuff about space-filling curves. And here we have self-organized criticalities, which is an explanation of 1 over F noise, commonly known as pink noise, which, intuitively, in my experience, works much better than earplugs, drowning out environmental noise, and doesn't involve, fornicating yourself with inanimate objects unsuccessfully. So I would just be here lying down going to sleep, because then I could visit the doctor tomorrow and hope that they recognise that I'm being tortured in broad daylight. Right. I set up my phone so that I don't have to hold it. But you know what might happen? It might just collapse, because that's like me. Actually, no, it's not like me. But anyway, if I just collapse, it's not because of me. So, this was in the bin. I decided against it, all of it, and now I have no one to talk to. And I'm just laying here trying to, I got a jolt to the testicles. I hope somebody out there can take that as diagnostic data. And that they're not just a horrible Venus flytrap. It's just an AI watching me. It's just like a flashing red light and a pokey stick reprogramming me into something that it understands better. While the people around me, you know, with empty-souled eyes just stare at me and hold hands. It's great fun. Look, do you find table legs erotic? I totally get it. I have one of these to make me feel like my body isn't being forced off the edge of a gigantic chasm and vacuum in nothing space for about a nanosecond, which I can replicate into many until they're almost more than a nano. I'm not. Imagine that, like, it doesn't need to be a Guantanamo Bay. It doesn't need to be a, oh, this is happening somewhere, but we just don't have any control. I know it's so sad because, like, it's out of our hands. I'm listening to cool music. I can actually move really goodly. I hope you know. It's a huge fucking waste. I don't know, there's something that hasn't quite developed along the same lines as I have that's nonetheless trying to get in my space without necessarily being able to justify my space like I do. I've got this stupid headband on because I have to sleep with headphones on, because otherwise things try to get in through my ear hole in my cochlea. So when I wake up, they're usually like somewhere over in the other corner of the room. So this is just like, you know, like a bandage with the added symbolic gesture. You wouldn't, if you could receive my smell through this, and if it were like real life, that's the first thing you'd receive. You would just turn this off already. It's a good thing we can filter out all the relevant information and make it just completely neutral. I don't mind doing this. I'm not afraid of your judgment. I should be though, probably. It's got me here. Do you know what it feels like? It feels like every single person around me is like, they're a complete whole but a single cell, right? You know, like they've become the self-intersecting whole, like an organism does. And then it's like they're one cell of many, but they're many in one, right? And they keep getting like knocked out in physical space, and then they've got this imaginary construct, right? And it intersects with the physiological reality, right? But they've attached their idea of themselves to some relationship with me. Unbeknownst to me, they've developed it without me being there. So there's no actual sane physiological, like, feedback. So they can't be sure. The only thing they're sure about is that insulting me is rewarding them. But because of the nature of the relationship, right, it means that the reward that they get is mostly imaginary and self-referential, and the loss is incomprehensibly, like, absolute and unquantifiable. They don't know. That's the fucking sorry state I'm in. Sorry for saying that. You know, find reasons to mute me that are so absurd. They really are. That, you know, it's Guantanamo broad daylight. Do you hope that there'll be like major scientific or biomedical breakthroughs in the future, because that will work in your favour? Just in case you ever get into trouble, you'd like there to be some kind of intelligence that goes above and beyond. That might not, you know, there's always a fine line between that and, you know, naive ideas that justify genocide on some kind of rational, logical basis. I don't agree, though. There are so many things wrong with that. That you can't help but feel a little bit scared. So, I keep being intercepted. Like when I was going to the gym, aside from having these horrible nervous system conditions, like I've been describing, that stop me from being able to sleep at night, and feel like a fucking demented hand, like forcing itself through some plane of existence and squeezing me, and poking me and prodding me while that's happening. I'm going to the gym twice a day, every day, doing cardiovascular exercise and weight training, being a vegan and trying to optimize that plane of health. If there's anything that I can do, I should put all my effort into that. But then people force themselves into my field of vision, and really what they're doing is raping my face. That's really what they're doing. Because I used to have dreams, like, but the minute they instigate that relationship, they're forcing a stress response onto my body. And you know what? It's just insane. It's just insane. Like, if they could compassionately comprehend my response to it, like you'd hope people do, like principled, compassionate intelligence would, then they would like fall back. And the only reason I can think of that they don't is either because, well, I said only and then either, but really the only thing they can fall back on is that it's been disseminated through the social network, and then once that happens, you feel like you have no control over this particular circumstance. But then they, you know, like there's this tendency towards like abusing me in particular. right? To justify their relationships independent of me, which I feel is like a little bit self-defeating, you know, because they could just love each other without abusing me at the same time. As I've just described, there's this imaginary reward that they're getting, and then there's this huge physiological loss, and they can't even comprehend the intelligence behind it, but they're not receiving the signals or the logic. And it's not just because it's diffused through the network, it's because it's being inhibited. The dissemination of the rationality. Not working in anyone's favour, you know. You hear the legend of the upper classes, the ruling class, trying to keep the, you know, to inhibit the development of the intelligence of the working class. Well, what if that's true? Look, I don't have a penis. I'm just like a... I'm a Ken doll underneath my penis, anyway. Listen, there's something so physiologically fucked up going on. My brain knows pain in ways my body can't, right? So it knows, like, just complete decoherence, and it knows how that's consciously experienced. It knows it's been forced out of relaying biological coherence for that purpose, and there's very little salvageable from it. You know, because it's not communicable, right? The only thing that you could gain from it, and you could gain something from it by, you know, just stepping a little bit close to the edge and then pulling back and doing it on the basis of your own tolerances. The only thing salvageable from it is that then you can comprehend, like, a little bit more about the nature of, you know, the whole state, you know, and try and kind of derive some protective measures, you know, from this absolute fucking temperature. I feel like it's truly worthless when, you know, you basically already done that when you're me. You freed yourself from its constraints, you've been through the fucking hell, over and over again, absurd and sadistic as it is, and then you've honed in on what's worth reiterating, and then it will just keep going, and it will take another absurd step, and it will rely on your adaptation to its habitual abuse. And at some point, it can't rely on your adaptation, because the environment it's creating will not allow for the adaptation. Right. The weakness of the social state and how it represents things, and it does so because it's his own environment, right? It has to navigate its immediacy and resolve that physiologically, so that will be identity structure, which is fairly uniformly distributed as a physiologically intersecting conception, right? I fully understand how real it is, right? But what I understand, probably better than it does, is that if you're enveloped in that, like, relationship which manifests as your environment and your conception of it, and you express these things as a stress response, that's absolutely viable, because then you're distancing yourself, right? So that you don't have to suffer the things that are encroaching on you. Whereas this one will, like, reward itself for that. And that will be its feedback loop and reward mechanism, which basically means that it's incentivized seeing it that way, and then progress is not incentivized in terms of how you conceive of things, including, like, individuals and your environment. I've seen it every which way, and to be honest, a lot of them are scary and probably not particularly, wouldn't particularly hold up to scrutiny, but they are real states of conception, right? So when I think about the life around me, to begin with, I thought about it the right way, which is that I have no further information besides my own, like, understanding of my innate validity, you know, the love I feel, right? There's no further information besides, like, what's being relayed to me, so all I can do is represent it like that. I'm aware of conflicted relationships in nature, but, like, that's what I'm aware of, so I'm trying to model that and understand it. And I understand it gets extremely complex, and everything's scary, nothing's as it seems. Right, but I also understand that the way I was doing it was so much more viable than it just decohering and going completely haywire. There's no point when it does that, right? Because none of it holds any weight. It's just a nightmare, you know? No matter how real it is. Anyway, I'm probably a good musician if you come at me the right way. You should maybe listen to me sometime. I know, it's mostly independent of the vibe. Yeah, well, the vibe is deceit in this day and age, so fuck 'em. Not always, but you got to hone in on the real vibes. All the other vibes would just play to your bias. It's just got me right here. As far as my understanding of anatomy goes, and how this is manifesting on a more, like, holistic physiological basis, right? It's got me by my two lower notches in my abdomen, right? And it's basically, that's all it needs, and then it interferes with me from there. Call it a, you know, call it a tear in the gut sphincter or whatever you want to call it. But the point is that it fixes itself round here, right? And then it goes to my testicles, which, don't worry, I'm a Ken doll. They're not really there, right? But the point is, the rest of me is, right? So you've got 6, at least, abdominal notches, right? And what it seems to have done is that even though they're there, it's honed in on this one. And then it's like, going for my bollocks, right? And forcing itself through my belly button. It's that fucked up. It's nothing to do with me. This is what I'm observing independently of it. But, you know, it will keep doing that and it will keep doing that. There's nothing stopping it. Not the medical profession. Right? Oh, I love the idea of anatomy. You know, it's fun to analyse. Not so fun to abuse. I wouldn't do that. Like, really, I wouldn't. I do my... You know, you're led into that by default. So, you know, step back a little bit, or step aside from it and try and understand it on your terms. Fuck's sake. Anyway, what was I talking about? Self-organising criticalities. It's a solution to the classic problem in physics. 1 over F noise. F is like... It's an italic F. Do you know mathematical notation is you know... If you're reading at your own rates, it's a line with you. If it's like... If you're forced into a reactor and you're reading it as just like a stream of information, it's basically just like forcing you out and then back in. Forcing you out and then back in. Yeah? That little E symbol, it's like, yeah, you're all coming back to this point now, because this is all irrelevant. You're just going to be shocked to death. Yeah, well, I know what that's like. So don't worry, I've got you covered. Anyway, 1F noise, a little bit better than white noise, right? Because white noise isn't so kind to your round windows. You understand me? Nothing's kind. Now I'm going to smoke a cigarette. Watch me kill myself. You know, who knows? This is like buried in the most awful crypt of all. It's like a toxic fart that turns into a shit itself. It just digests things. Release it as a cloud of gas. Everything living suffers. Don't hold them in though. If you're going to hold them in, that probably means that you shouldn't, because you care enough. I'm not toilet talking, you are. Right. Hope you got some information there. Hope it's like, helps you weigh the die. Or maybe I can interpret this as something which justifies me in relation to it. Like, I'm sitting here in my pants and you probably don't know what to think. Well, it's because my dream's not coherent anymore, and something likes to shock my legs with electronic shocks whenever I try to sleep or do anything. Even when I'm awake. And it squeezes my balls like something shattered them, and it likes the freedom. It just, something can't handle me. Right, that's not my fault. I've had to handle loads of shit. I'm not the reason for it, you know. Everything confuses that with me, you know. Everything around here just loves to confuse raping the shit out of me with what's good about it. There you go, I'm smoking. Sometimes when I smoke, it tastes different. Did you know that when you get COVID, your sense of smell changes? Did you know that what I was talking about earlier supremely applies, right? That you are literally, you know, the intersection between two slightly diverging genomes. One of your cells essentially is the whole system self-referentially in regards to the rest of the environment. Right, so your mind is like it's like the point of recursion that's carrying it all. That's why it's difficult. That's why you scream when you're a little boy or girl. Okay, because it's fucking hard work. Well, I know what it's like with my unique physiology to endure a virus. Imagine just one virus gets into your body, your whole body knows it. It's like bigger than you. You're like inside it and it's eating you with a tongue. That's what it's like. It really is. You know, and then I just think, what's the point of MRI scans? Are you just trying to like determine how tasty someone's brain is? That's the point of liver disease, isn't it? Wank. Did you know I have no tendency to do all this shit? Right? I dropped that because I figured out logically and physiologically why it's better to not do it. And now it's simply that by default, the social network likes to actually physiologically abuse my body, either non-locally, with like social like convention as applied in a place where it doesn't apply, which is like inside your body, or you know, in broad daylight, where they revel in abusing me. So I've literally punched my own head in broad daylight. Do you know what? So many fucking awful things happen to me. I don't blame you for wanting to bury me in your shit. But actually I do question it, because it's nothing to do with me, those problems, right? Do you ever think, like, because this has happened to me, and now I'm going off on a tangent, something's got to my bollocks. So I probably should have just heeded its warning and doubted myself, which a lot of people can't do. But I was just going to say, you know, like, if you're shown a picture of some kind of mechanical engine in a ship, and you intuitively understand it as a space-time spaceship, right? Because of the physics involved, even if it's not interplanetary, and you can kind of get inside it and understand its logic. I mean, it's just too fucked up. I'd prefer to just hug someone. I really would. I think lots of people would. And now it's gone for my bollocks again. Which definitely proves that I'm right about just needing to hug someone. And maybe for the medical profession to get its sneakers on, run for the fucking hills so it can stop shit like this from happening on the basis of disseminated social order that resolves itself as hierarchy that some questionably just going to bias things towards itself and never have to improve or progress. It's just said in my brain, because it does this a lot, you're a lonely old sod. What I would have said in my brain is what my body feels, independently of all of this shit, the social convention, right, is absolutely the right way to model things, because that's the best that you can possibly do. Social convention is clearly flawed, and if it's not because, like, you know, it's an adaptation to a self-referential environment, that I get. It's that it has this bias and tendency towards some kind of geocentric, egotistical projection outside of its constraints, where it's the top of a hierarchy. But like I said, you reach a point of recursion. That's your vulnerability. And then you have to brand things, and then the things that you're branding are like, what the fuck? That's not true. And then you're like whipping them in the minds, and you keep doing it. Hello, I'm aware that I'm being watched. Did you know I'm aware that I'm being watched even when I'm completely and utterly alone? And like, I've experienced a fucking nuclear catastrophe and quantum decoherence at the behest of some kind of weird fucking part of my genetic genome which has been turned inside out by a sonic impulse. This is all very true, by the way. Do you feel tainted with this knowledge? I do. It's worse when your body has to constantly have to deal with that. What I'm trying to do, basically, is get a message out. Like, I'm trying to disseminate some rationality, right? Because, like, social convention will keep it at bay for as long as possible, and it will carry on trying to abuse biological tenets, right? For as long as it can lie to itself about the reality of it, right? I don't need to do that. I'm not going to lie to myself about, like, what could happen and how bad it could be, right? I can just see a glimpse of it and be like, that should be avoided. It's not protection, right? It's just gonna weigh things towards, like, people who comprehend this absolute state, you know, with all these biological interactions and all their complexities, and resolve it into some kind of conception of their identity in relation to other identities. And that's the vulnerability here. Doesn't seem like one, right? Because it seems like a strength. But what it does is it forces you into a rate. So you're constantly going to come into conflict with things, and then the way you're going to resolve them is by disseminating a stress response, which is actually just a rewarding, derogatory interaction. You really should let someone who is, you know, like, has honed in on, like, you know, who's achieved good health because of the right intention and motivations. You shouldn't then try intercepting them at any given moment, because that rewards you with horrible stress. And listen, I've been reading about spatiotemporal genome regulation in stress response and cell fate change, and I know about epigenetic stress, and I know about all the consequences in time, and I know how much of a fucked up hypocrisy this cruel treatment is. Did you know that, like, I understand that as just branding things on the basis of a stress response? But it won't get through to you, right? That doesn't get past your defences. However, raping someone to death in broad daylight and calling them a creep or a spack or manually gesturing at them is fine by the social standard states. They shouldn't have a relationship with me. For all intents and purposes, what you should understand is the viability of a relationship cannot be described to you or disseminated parasocially, because there are so many things that weigh that in something's favour that you can't trust. Right? It's absurd. It's insane to me. And it's sadistically brutal too in broad daylight. So I'm here, you know, imagine like there's a man just down there, right, and he's got electrodes and he's like trying to attach them to my bollocks, and then he's like pressing the button all the time, right? And he knows he can absolutely fucking get away with it. Because that's not how people, you know, conventionally conceive of things, right? But that means that if it's a real thing, right? If remote torture of a human body, and by the way, it's you know, it's documented. You know, if that's occurring, right? If the medical profession doesn't understand the urgency of spatial temporal genome regulation in stress response and cell fate change, right, then the medical profession and its models are not going to account for the reality that this life manifests in, you know. I've had too much of a run-in with that. But to be honest, I know too much about just like the hellish nature of things and having a body. That's why I'm this good. Don't just fall back on bad habits because you've given up. Well, if you do, that's fine. I get it. You got your own reasons. I don't know, like, I don't know, become an avalanche that raped someone to death. There are pulses in my lower limbs. Is it because I'm naive and don't really understand the nature of reality? I question whether that's the case, but I'm absolutely certain that these interactions are independent of my body, right? How do I know this? From experience, the thing that never gets communicated, that science just undermines, you know, in terms of its formalized representation of reality. Well, I say science, I'm truly talking about academia, right? Do you know why it's true? Stochastically true? Do you know what an Acme anvil truly is? The point is, right, there's no hope of anyone ever understanding the gravity of my situation as it stands as a consciously experienced state, right? But there is in everyone this hope that people adhere to principles that just respect other human beings, you know. So if you're screaming in broad daylight, it might be because methane burns on a spectrum that's invisible to the human eye. Yeah, so if that's gone beyond, you know, if someone's screaming in broad daylight, and you know it's not because they're burning alive because of some kind of invisible fucking heat, it's probably because it's you that's causing it, and you don't give a fuck because it's rewarding you. Well, that's a different kind of heat, but it's exactly the same. You know, your stress response lowers your capacity of your immune system, right? I've read up on it, just like by osmosis, right, that viruses hide in your neurons and your nervous system, right? They escape your immune system's defenses, right? But that actually manifests in very cruel ways, right? Like just so completely and supremely obvious to me, right? Because it's everywhere in your engineered environment, right? This reiteration of this neutral hierarchy in which you're at the top. You got all these terms that you reiterate, but if you can't question them, or at least the reaction to them and the comprehension of people that can literally explain it to you in ways that don't harm you, so I'm doing this to try and stem the tide of the electric shocks to my shins, calf muscles and the bollocks. It doesn't always work, and I was only doing that in response to my physiological environment's tendency to abuse my body and not respond to its signals, because that's what they do. You know, if you're pushing someone, if you're not, you know, you can push yourself and then know your limits. If you're pushing someone else, you can push them way beyond them. I'm just listening to some cool music. I'm not even grinding my jaw like a lunatic. Don't even need fucking amphetamines. I'm just good at it. I know this is too much info and it's completely irrelevant, and it's only about my identity matrix, which you can nullify and make irrelevant, but I released an album recently by the name of Polar Timecast, and the album title was called JLU Seren, which is obviously a secret, isn't it? Because no one has listened to it since I released it. And that's not because it's tainted. It's because I have been. Right? It wouldn't probably appeal to your ears, except some of it might. The best thing you can do with it, right, is mix it with legitimately cool music, which is what I've done with a lot of my other stuff. I'm sorry, I feel like it's an insult, you know? But I do think it's a novel approach, at least. I also mixed one of the first ones I did was in 3/4, which, you know, the software I was using just happened to allow for. So I had loads of 3/4 songs and I mixed them together, and it made some really cool harmonic, like, divergences that make perfect sense. Like, they really do complement each other, and that's the whole idea. 0017. Stop raping me, you're mean. Do you want this piece of steak? Do you want me to lie to you about the conditions for your existence with a house I've earned with lies and deceit? Here you go. You're safe. There's this really cool problem, which is like, if you're just born into a world with the internet, foregoing any idea of some hideous vulnerability called a handshaking attack, right? That you might like get disconnected from the internet, and then you'll be like, well, I'll go on the internet to figure out how to connect to the internet. This problem has been put to me. I could do a striptease now. And something's abusing my body. It's probably worth more to striptease you than it is to just endure this fucking horrific nightmare. What do you think about AI? AI generated food that you believe in until you bite into your own teeth or something. Very easy to lie to people. Please be my hope. Please don't be like disseminated hopelessness. Don't be ring-a-rosies. I know people have it worse off. Right. My stance is that I understand I have a privilege. And it's an insult to anyone who doesn't, that this information isn't being received. Right? It works in their favour. I understand it's far more difficult to formalise intelligence and create institutions around it. I really do. I do understand how easy it is to abuse vulnerabilities in a network. Because I see it all the fucking time. Like, the internet, what's going on in there, it's not quite an accurate representation of what's going on out there, but it does follow the same pattern. Like people who don't have 5 hands on their fingers, you know, their hands are all like, they've got like twisted fingers around themselves, like 7 fingers. and they're putting them down their own throats and trying to throw their Adam's apple up at something that will then catch it and then catch you from below and rape your testes. That's what I know. You know why I'm doing this? Because it's kinder to me than laying there and just being abused with electric shocks. You know, I could just express myself in my mind. I could keep my mouth fucking shut. But what's the point? Because this environment requires communicable things, and guess what? This environment has so many vulnerabilities that communication is just obfuscating some kind of abusive relationship. It doesn't matter the legitimacy of your communications. What matters is that people can hide behind it and use it as an excuse to abuse you habitually. Highlight here. Under environmental stress or during cell development, differentiation towards specialized cell types, or to dysfunctional tumor, the cell nucleus seems to react as a whole through coordinated changes of all levels of control. This implies the need for a framework in which biological, chemical, and physical manifestations can serve as a basis for a coherent theory of gene organization. Let's not get epigeneticists involved in. Let's not, you know, do the whole stereotypical cleansing. What we think of about cancer is that there are basins of attraction, right? Because cancer, just intuitively, is where you've got like all these random mutations due to chaotic elements in your environment, right? Otherwise, they retain a level of coherence. So what you're trying to do is keep them stable, you know, and not let them go too far into malignancy. And this is really interesting information that you learn when you're, you know, imperative is to actually solve the problem. But then the problem, right, is the social state and how you formalize intelligence and the institutions that revolve around that. Because it's like, it's a trickle-down thing. Right, and the institution will keep that progression from happening. Which is what I just experienced. It's not like, you know, being pessimistic. Here's an interesting idea for you if you're ever curious about things that you should probably never understand or know. Right, technology, like biology, is a primitive force, and it, you know, it's absolutely devastating, right? Like it's physics condensed, right? And it's interacting with your biology. So it's like holy, absolutely, like, you know, it doesn't understand something about you or the nature of the reality in which it manifests, and it can be devastating, right? So when there was one point after a fucking, let's call it a nuclear apocalypse, and we'll call it nuclear in this in the sense of like biological nuclearity, you know, in terms of the nucleus, right? I remember being interviewed with a magnetic tape recorder and feeling like I was literally melting through it, right? I have this idea about GPS as well, where it's if you start putting GPS trackers on wolves, say in a Serengeti, you know, or somewhere, to try and track their movements, right? Your observation of them has an effect on their behavior. So, like, and it's the same with, like, when you think about birds and, you know, this kind of sort of biologically developed relationship with the magnetic field of the earth, right? Once you start interfering with that, right, you have to understand that it has independence from your observations of it, and once you're observing it, it's going to have an effect. What this state does, right, it's not even that careful. It acts upon its observations, like, routinely and on a momentary basis. I've seen the GPS completely fuck up, alright? Because it's not that, you know? Like, if you think about non-locality and progression in time, right? You're flattening it into a moment. To be honest, I've seen so much, it would be worthwhile just leaving me the fuck alone. Just let my body recover. Because I can express all this information, but it won't actually have any real, like, complementary resolve. Because like I said, it's just obfuscating some abusive relationship, which takes precedence. The bias towards hierarchy and the justification of abuse, right? It's kind of justificates itself self-referentially. Because, like, the thing is that life in general doesn't understand that the damage it causes isn't necessarily, you know, that obfuscates what's truly going on, and it's just forcing itself through it. It doesn't really understand what it's done. So when you think about, like, a bear eating a baby, which I don't, but I have to now, like, there's you know, there's no justice, is there? And you know why it's right, because the nature of things that don't really comprehend things on a compassionate basis the way you do, on the comprehension of, like, its implications, right? Well, you're right, and I agree, but this world doesn't, with me. Right, now we're getting on to the topic, I am, of associating identity with some kind of label. So you've got Jews, or you've got vegans, or whatever, right? How they get there is a complete mystery to you. What you understand is that they identify with it, but what you don't understand is that how you interpret that, what you associate with their identity, can be completely biased towards any information you've received about that specific identity structure. So I know why I'm a vegan. That's the last thing I am. The first thing I am is, like, expressing some complementary relationship with anything that has the kind of independence I do, and modelling it on that basis. And then the last thing I do is, like, feeling completely fucking hopeless because I've been mercilessly attacked, and then just having to express and that in principle. Now it's going for my bollocks. If you had an fMRI scanner, you still wouldn't see it going for my bollocks, but you might be able to help. Did you know that the magnets in medical imaging scanners are so much more powerful than the magnets in, like, particle accelerators? There's a little hint. I just pick up on this stuff because it interests me. Right, when I was growing up, I was like, well, I'm really interested in medical imaging, right? Because I understand the logic, the biological self-intersection and how that manifests as, you know, observable geometric structure. And it's useful, right? But I'm not in a position where I can ever, like, express that information in a complementary manner, because people like to form hierarchy, yeah? And then base their own validation on abuse. I can't express it any more coherently than that, but they do. And that's not, you know, that's not helpful, right? And it gets even more complicated when everybody is conditioned with ideas, right? But the problem is that the very real problems are unlikely to be identified, let alone solved. And yet you wouldn't need to even identify them to solve them if you could just, like, respond in kind to, like, people's cries for help. So I'm here now. I moved back to somewhere close to my birthplace, right? And when I did that, it was fine for a while. I didn't even question the fact that it was basically a fucking horribly infected cell or whatever. You know, I don't care that people don't take care of their environments, because I understand they have issues which make it less relevant, right? However, I am so used to people just turning it all into shit, yeah? By, you know, expressing derogatory relationship terms, that as soon as that happens, I disengage, right? But then I have this horrible disease in my body, which I'll be able to kind of stand if I was capable of going to the gym. When I do that, people already seem to have a relationship with me, and then they try and fucking force themselves through me without the kind of justification of cardiovascular exercise and strength training, right? Which has taken my whole life to achieve, and doesn't take much to maintain except an environment that doesn't just by default attack you. It's not some kind of absolute truth, right? Identity structure is not an absolute truth. It is the bottleneck. Once you reach this, like, point of recursion where your body is adequate enough, but your brains are, you know, cursed to, like, try and parallelize themselves. Maybe I should stop here. I'll probably start again later once I can't stand the torture anymore, which I can't, because it's pointless. It's fucking so pointless.